I want to talk about your interview with Vice President Kamala Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz. You secured the first interview with them since she ascended to the top of the ticket, and it created a lot of conversation. What were your impressions of Harris and Walz in that interview?
My impression was that these are two people who are still in the early days of their relationship, trying to figure out, and in the early days of their candidacy, each of them trying to figure out how to navigate it. Every day is like 12 news cycles, and it's been like that for the past 8 years. But it's easy to quickly forget that even though she has been vice president for almost 4 years, and she has been in public service, she was obviously a senator, AG, so on and so forth. This is the kind of thing when you run for president that once you get to this time in the calendar, you have been through your paces.
Right.
And you have your reps, whether it is, well, first of all, you have the votes from the people who are voting in your party. And the Biden-Harris ticket had the votes, but not her. But just in terms of what it takes to be a successful candidate, you have a lot of time, not just to sort of learn the performance and feel comfortable with doing an interview, which actually she did a lot more interviews during the Biden-Harris campaign than people realize, because she just did a lot of it under the radar.
And nobody really
and nobody was
on
paying
them
attention,
because
which
they
is
were all
what
paying attention to Biden.
Which is what you kind of want.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the policies, she's still quickly she was shot out of a cannon, so she's trying to figure out, what do I want to stick with him on, what do I not? She, for the most part, didn't want to have any daylight with Biden on policies, which I understand.
So the thing that stuck out to me most, and this might be a little harsh on Harris and Walz, but she seemed to have a hard time answering the obvious questions that she was going to get in this first interview. She struggled to say what she would do on day one. She had a sort of evasive answer when you asked her about fracking. And Walz, I thought too, his answer on suggesting that he had served in combat was sort of evasive. He said, "I speak candidly," which is obviously he didn't speak candidly. That was the whole problem. Did you get a sense that they were ready for these kinds of questions? And this is obviously Kamala Harris is going to have a debate next week with Trump. I feel like she's going to need to have better answers going forward if she has any chance of success.
Well, on fracking, and if you just came from the moon and you say, why is she asking about this very specific, very sort of micro question? But we all know why I asked the question, because she has to win Pennsylvania, and this is like table stakes in Pennsylvania. I actually thought she was really clear. Like she said, I will not ban fracking.
Right.
What she was less clear about, and maybe what you're getting at, is how she got there.
Why she changed.
Yes.
Because you had to ask twice.
Yeah.
You had to ask it multiple times questions twice, because the answers weren't necessarily answering the question. They were answering what they wanted the question to be, which is often what politicians do. But it came off as a little evasive at times, I thought. And that's why I wanted to ask the broader question, which is, if you've changed your position on X, Y, and Z, how can you assure voters that those positions won't change again once they elect you? Right. Which I do think, a lot of liberals are like, oh, you're asking Republican talking points. But that's like a fundamental question that if I'm a swing voter, I want to know the answer to. If I'm not sure if I'm going to vote for Trump or Harris or not vote at all, that's something that will inform my vote. There's also a difference between what every candidate in the history of American politics has done, which is run to please a base in a primary and then move to the center in a general election. Harris's, the way she ran in 2020 feels, and the way she's running now, feels a little more extreme than that, I would say. Not extreme in terms of policy, just the turn is a little bit...
The differences?
Yeah.
And I think, again, this is in part because, well, there are two dynamics at play here. Number one, the 2020 Democratic race was in it was in the middle of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, and it was also after the Democrats did extremely well in the midterm before that and elected a lot of very progressive, very liberal Democrats.
Right.
And so that's where the kind of zeitgeist was in the Democratic Party. I'm not defending it, I'm explaining it. And then you have Harris quickly have to, absorb and be a part of not her own positions, but Joe Biden's, because he was the president. Mm-hmm. And so that's why it's the contrasting where she has been with Joe Biden, who was elected because he wasn't like those other Democrats who were running against him. He was perceived as more moderate. You can argue whether he governed like that, but that's how he got elected. And she has been part of that administration. So trying to suss out what she would do now that she's the boss and now that she's in charge is really the key.
Yeah. Now, as is often the case these days, whenever there's a big high-profile interview like this, you took some heat from the left, as you noted, some heat from the right. What did you make of that criticism? I mean, the right, their problem was that you didn't necessarily, they felt, hold her down on some of her more nebulous policy positions. Mm-hmm. What would you say to that?
I think you just said, I tried.
Right.
I mean, you can't force somebody to answer a question. And I asked to follow up. I tried to get more into the nitty-gritty and get the answer. And sometimes, my experience in doing interviews is that once you ask once, fine, twice, fine, three times, if you don't get a clear answer, that's kind of your answer.
Yeah, that was one of my next question, actually. How persistent do you feel like you should be in these kind of interviews where you're speaking with a vice president or a presidential candidate? Did you ask 10 times if you need to, or does it depend on the question?
It totally depends on the question, on the place you are in the calendar, on the importance of it. There are a million factors. It's really subjective, don't you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think it depends on the question too.
Yeah.
I had Vivek Ramaswamy on this show a couple weeks ago, and he got very upset with me because I asked him about his book from 2 years ago where he said that Trump was a threat to democracy.
Yeah.
And it was 2 years ago. It's not that long ago.
No.
He said, why are we talking about ancient history? And I kept asking about it, and he got very upset. That kind of thing, I think, is worth asking 10 times, until you get a straight answer. Other questions, like the questions that you had in the Harris interview, I don't think,
and
one
also,
or two follow-ups.
Well, and also, people have to understand that you have a limited window of time.
Right.
And so you have to decide whether you want to just, throw everything out that you were planning, which is fine. I've done that many times. If you either hear something that you want to follow up on. Know that it could be
the end of the interview.
Yeah.
If you just keep asking it. Yeah.
Because you'll run out of time. But because this was, I viewed it as foundational because it was her first, hopefully not her last. I know she will do many others, but that I felt like I needed to have some touch points, some basic touch points on a few different issues. There definitely were hundreds of topics that I would have liked to have asked about. I just didn't have the time.
Now, just a little inside baseball here. How does an interview like this come together? Because obviously there's a lot of competition. Quickly, all of a sudden. Every network was trying to get this interview. How did CNN get it? How did you get it?
I just like everybody else was lobbying for it. Yeah, I had interviewed her several times during. I covered her in the Senate. She wasn't there very long, but I did cover her there. And when she was running for president and was in the spin room after the debates in 2019 during the 2020 cycle. So I definitely have interviewed her many times. And then, and so I was pushing for it, and my network was pushing for it, and it just, I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer of how
you were chosen.
Why, but I'm not questioning it.
Now, obviously, there was a lot of pressure on Harris to do an interview, which he hadn't done until yours, and there's that pressure's, I assume, going to continue because we've got 66 days or so left. And do you think that the Harris campaign is going to continue to be at least interview averse going forward? And do you think that's a mistake for them?
I don't think that they're going to be interview averse.
Okay.
I don't, because I think that they understand and she understands. that it's important, and now the focus is on the debate. They wanted to get one done before the debate, and even though it seems like it was a very long time, and I think on paper, and it was many, many days between when she announced and when she secured the nomination, and those 24 hours, and she sat down for an interview. Because of the unusual circumstances, you could make the argument, like if one was running her campaign, that the longer you wait, the higher the stakes.
Yes.
And just to have just done little ones, do local interviews,
Right.
They didn't do that for whatever reason. But I do think she'll do more.